that we need to go through a full, complete, detailed review. We're not at that stage. And please, if I'm saying this correctly. So, based on this review, the commission has given the staff authority to move forward with this more detailed data collection. Again, the number of organizations is not in the 1 or 2, but it's not in the 20, 30, 40. The majority of organizations here in the state have passed the review, but there are a number that we are being and on the debate, we will come back and probably we will need another executive session, which we will inform you what we're going to vote. So we will know the drill. And we'll provide cookies. David, can I say okay?
Yep, great summary.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move forward now with a very important, and I really want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of
Mr.
work.
Chairman, before we move on to the CHIA presentation, we do want to provide just a very high-level overview of where we are with the performance improvement plans, just building quickly off of what you said. So the staff will move through this very quickly. You summed it up very well.
So, thank you, Chairman Altman. As described, we've received a list from CHIA. We're in the process of performing the gated review, moving forward with additional questions for some of these entities, and then the board will vote after that process as to whether or not to require 1 or more performance improvement plans. Steps 3 through 6 on this slide may take place if the board votes to require a PIP. The basis for the follow-up is the gated review process that we have described before in these meetings. We first look at performance in those contracts or books of business for which the entity was identified. If we still have concerns, we look at performance in all of an entity's contracts or books of business to see whether their performance in the identified books of business is balanced by better performance in other books. We then look at mitigating and exacerbating factors that might influence our decision one way or the other. We look, for example, at spending by category, inpatient, outpatient, professional. We look at recent market activity as recommended by the CTMP committee last year. We look at performance in adjacent years. And where we still have concerns after those 3 steps, that is where we seek additional information from the entity through a series of meetings. And then if we still have concerns after that, the last gate in the review is the analysis of the information received during these follow-up meetings. And if there's still concern after we review that information, that is where a performance improvement plan would be considered. So just a few of the key themes that we did see in the gated review process this year. The first was, in terms of provider spending, we found that several large providers in the Commonwealth were only identified based on their growth in one payer contract and that their overall spending growth was moderate. We found that commercial books of business were more frequently the basis for referral than were Medicaid or Medicare books of business. We found that adjusted and unadjusted TME trends were not always tracking in the same direction. We found that changes in member months in a given contract or book of business were also relatively common. Growth or decreases in size that can make looking at a trend difficult. And we also identified a few data issues, and we will be working with CHIA to resolve those. So on this slide, just to give you a sense of the types of questions that we anticipate asking of follow-up entities. I won't read this whole slide to you, but just a sampling of the key questions here. What were the causes of growth? What can the entity point to, perhaps looking at their internal data that we can't assess with public data? Does the entity have any cost control activities in place? If they've identified these trends on their own, are they taking steps actively to address them? Do they have results? Have they continued with strategies or changed them if they found that they were not working? And as I mentioned previously, definitely a few questions on the data itself that may change our assessment and other topics as recommended by the commissioners. And then just briefly, the timeline moving forward. We will be sending notices this week and then holding follow-up meetings with some of those entities, reviewing the information received during those meetings, and then sharing our assessment of that information with commissioners who, at this time, we would anticipate a board vote as to whether or not to require a PIP, possibly at the November board meeting. If the board were to require a PIP, that would mean that the entity, if they did not request an extension, would be developing and submitting that proposal between November and December. Staff would then evaluate that proposal and the board would vote to either approve or reject the PIP proposal. We estimate that would be approximately January.
So that concludes our briefing on this topic, and we'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman, and we can move on to our next agenda item.
Very good, and thank you for following. So as I was saying, again, we're really very fortunate in this state to have an organization like CHIA around. Why don't you come on up? So the process that was again outlined in the law is for CHIA to make available to the Health Policy Commission and really to the whole state a detailed analysis of the cost growth for the latest year that there is information. As Ray will point out how they did it, and there was a two-stage process: first preliminary data and then final data, which we will talk about. And so that with today's meeting, you will be making available this report to the public, right? That's right. And again, I want to thank you and your staff. I mean, this is really, several of us have the privilege of going around the United States. And as far as I know no state that knows more about what is going on in their healthcare system than Massachusetts. Thanks to you. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us a kind of a summary of what you found.
Great. Thank you very much, Chairman Altman, Vice Chair Everett, Secretary Sutters, all the rest of the members of the Commission. Thank you for having CHIA here today to share with you the results of our annual report on healthcare, Massachusetts healthcare system in 2016. Or I guess it's the 2017 report, but it's primarily looking at the 2016 calendar year. I should mention I have with me Caitlin Sullivan and Ashley Storms of CHIA. There's a huge amount of work that goes into putting this report together, and there's a lot of detail that underlies what you're going to see here today. I encourage people to go to our website, get the full report, which is much more extensive than the slides we'll have here, but even underlying that, there are data books that go into much greater depth about the information that we're presenting. And if you folks have questions and follow-ups that want to go into more depth, Ashley and Caitlin can provide the expertise that we need to go as deep as you want to go. So anyway, why don't we jump right into the report? The major topics that we're going to be covering, and as I say, the report itself goes into a few more areas that we don't cover just for reasons of time. In this presentation, for instance, we have a section in the report on quality of care in Massachusetts. It's relatively brief because we come out with a more extensive report on quality in the fall. But that's an example of something that's in the report that isn't in this particular presentation. But what I will talk about is the 2016 total healthcare expenditure growth. We'll take a look at some of the cost drivers that promoted or that contributed to the growth. We'll look at the adoption of alternative payment methods in Massachusetts during 2016. We'll take a little closer look at commercial enrollment and cost of coverage in the commercial market. And finally, we'll end with some data on member cost sharing. So this is kind of the highlight slide, if you will, the big takeaway of the total healthcare expenditure analysis for the year. And what it shows is that total healthcare expenditures in Massachusetts grew to $59 billion. When you factor in a small increase in population, that works out to be a 2.8% per capita increase from 2015 to 2016, which is, of course, below the 3.6% benchmark number. The constituent, the component parts of the spending broken up by insurance category are shown in this slide, and you can see the growth rates associated with the different categories. So commercial insurance grew at a 3.4% rate, mass health at a 4.4% rate, Medicare at a 3.3% rate, and then declines for net cost of private health insurance and other public programs. This takes a look at, probably refer to my notes on this. So this takes a look at the spending. This is on a per member per month basis, and this is by insurance category. And so what you see is essentially declines in the Medicare, stable to declines in the Medicare population. The commercial is up 3.4%, and mass health, you see larger increases than that, although we've talked to mass health, and this is being driven by program activities like redeterminations, the end of temporary coverage, and other things like that. So there are kind of drivers underneath the hood that are producing these numbers, but this is the breakout on a per member per month by insurance category. Were there other things on the slide that we were going to call out that I'm not thinking of? Or is that okay, great, thank you. So to put the total healthcare expenditure numbers in context, here what you see are the kind of multiple years of the numbers. On the far right, you see the 2.8% number that we've announced today. That's the 2016 initial. We're also today announcing the 2015 final, which you see is the dark blue dot, the 4.8%. That is an upward revision from the 4.1% that was the initial number released last fall. I should point out the way these numbers are derived, we get this, the total healthcare expenditure estimates are derived from data we receive from the health plans, not from the all payer claims data.